folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the riots in Los Angeles, the Hispanic rioting in Los Angeles, but also the issue of mass repatriation of Mexicans back to Mexico, the cost of looking after the Mexicans and particularly the illegals, but Hispanics generally, or Mexican Hispanics generally, the cost of looking after them in the United States, and what are the wider economic implications for the region. Now, I say this because the remittances going from this is Mexicans in the United States sending remittances back to Mexico, they account for somewhere in the region of 65 billion. I mean, it's up to 70 billion US dollars, depending on whose numbers you look at. And that constitutes, depending again on whose numbers you look at, somewhere between 5 and 6% of the total Mexican economy is made up of these remittances. Now, the Trump administration plans to put a very small, almost irrelevant, it's so tiny, tax on remittances going back to Mexico, and indeed elsewhere, remittances going to India, for example, and other countries. Mexico is not being singled out, but that would raise, if you look at, say pick 70 billion as 3%, there's 2 billion, maybe a little bit more in taxes. So it's almost in the overall scheme of the total US budget, a few $billion is really not no great shakes. But to the Mexican economy, where you've got 5% of your economy comes from Mexicans actually living in another country or working in another country, and so that's an issue. So. But the more important, I guess, the sort of associated or indirect things are more important. When you've got 15 to 20 million citizens coming back to Mexico, many of whom are now accustomed to first world lifestyles, very generous, food stamps and other welfare benefits, and they come back to Mexico, that's 15 to 20 million very mutinous, very angry people that are going to cause all sorts of trouble, and they want to have that sort of first world lifestyle, and they want to have it in Mexico. So the massive incompetence, corruption, and exploitation of peasants, all that sort of stuff that goes on in Mexico, you'd have a revolution, on your hands there, or certainly all the necessary ingredients for one. So the Mexican government, that has a Jewish person at their head. The Mexican government has got a real issue here. Not only will 5% of their, assuming all the Mexicans come back, not only will 5% of their economy be destroyed because of it, or undermined, limited. So if your economy suddenly shrinks by 5%, you've got a problem. And then you've got 15 to 20 million people that have been someone else's problem. Now, just looking at the illegals in California, I don't know how precise these numbers are, because there are supposed to be somewhere approximating 1 million illegal, just the illegals, for goodness sake, illegals living in LA County alone. Now, there are some saying it's actually quite a bit more than that. Or there are some arguing that the amount of Mexicans generally, or South Americans generally, there's some confusion over, are they from Mexico or from Ecuador or from El Salvador or Venezuela or somewhere else. But it just Mexicans alone are supposed to be around 1 million living in LA County, and in California the claim is that illegals, this is Hispanic illegals, cost California last year $31 billion US dollars. Now, I don't know how the calculation's made. For example, do they place a cost on someone like a illegal Hispanic kid being in school, for example. They say, well, that's worth X amount of dollars. But you need to be careful with that, because the school already exists, the building's already there, the teachers are already there, the entire education infrastructure is already in place. So if you put a value on that student being there, it's not a value that the school was created for them, or that's a fresh or new cost or additional cost or something. The increment of adding another student in is quite small. That doesn't mean it isn't a cost, and doesn't mean that dilutes the teachers and time because the kid can't speak English and that sort of thing. But when these costings are made, they tend to be a little creative on the margins. But it doesn't matter. The cost still runs into the tens of billions. That we can be sure of. Now, if it's 31 billion for illegals, this is Hispanic illegals, 31 billion for Hispanic illegals just in California, then you multiply that out across the United States, then you'd effortlessly surpass $100 billion, $100 billion in costs to just on Hispanic illegals. And that's before you get to, I know, Somalis and goodness knows what, Haitians and something. So the cost to the United States Treasury is enormous. Now, so the United States would save $31 billion or California. That's before you get to, the Treasury would say, well, far in excess of $100 billion US dollars just in repatriating all Hispanics back to South America, whether it be Mexico or Bolivia or somewhere else. So huge saving. On top of that, the jobs that would become available for Americans. Now, some of these jobs could be summer type jobs or casual weekend jobs for college kids, high school kids, and so on, which is how those jobs used to be, by the way. That would create a boon, I would think, for the American economy. On top of that, businesses that relied on slave peasant labor to survive, very marginal businesses that otherwise couldn't survive, will shut down, and then the resources will go elsewhere to more productive pursuits, or the business will have to become more productive, whether through automation or through better quality staff. If you've seen staff, say, operating in the hospitality industry, like in hotels and so on, and these illiterate, many of them suffering poor health, these illiterate Hispanic peasants, which I've seen up close in the United States, and compare that to an efficient white person, that then the difference is huge. In one instance, the Hispanics don't give a shit. They're just there to do as little as possible while taking as much as possible. Whereas the white person is part of the society, the community, and they not all of them, but majority of them see things very differently, and their sense of commitment and industry is accordingly. When I first went to the US as a very young man, on business, the people at the very lowest level in the hotels were Hispanic, the cleaners, that sort of thing. But the supervisors were all Anglo-Americans. Within 5 years, and certainly before 1990, and I'm still in my 20s at this point, the change was staggering. The pretty much everyone in the hotel, other than the more senior managers, were all Hispanic. Many of them not speaking a lick of English. Certainly the housekeeping staff. Now, I spoke sort of passport Spanish. I mean, not PhD level or anything, so it's street level and basic conversational level Spanish. And just as well I did, because if I wanted anything, if you only spoke English, they didn't know anything. They would have to go and get someone that could speak English. And I noticed the supervisors for these low-level cheap peasant workers weren't really supervising their work. They were just interpreters. And they themselves, they had pretty ordinary English. Nonetheless, I spoke enough Spanish, so if I needed another towel for the towels were wet and I hadn't changed them over, scusi por favor, una toalla. I even remember that, and so get the towel, but no, the amount of Hispanics appearing, certainly from the mid 80s onwards, staggered me. More and more, every shop you would go into, every restaurant, takeout food, the entire service industry began to, the taxi drivers, and so on, and any lower level job that wasn't filled by Hispanics was filled by black people. And then I'd go into, say, an office where it was, this is like the IT industry, I suppose you'd call it, the computer industry of the day. I go into an office and there would be, back initially at least, there'd be all white men, maybe the odd woman, but all white men. That changed fairly quickly. So the offices that had all white men were suddenly 50% white women. So you could see the changes coming in all directions. And over this time, the American economy was going downhill fast, or certainly as I perceived it. Now, coming to the issue of the sort of secondary or knock-on costs, many of the Mexicans that live anywhere near the border, within certainly a few hours drive, the US-Mexico border, they go over the border to do most of their shopping, and the differences in prices can be quite substantial to what you'd pay in the United States. Going to buy flour or other foodstuffs and oils, cooking oil, all sorts of things like that. They can save themselves a lot of money doing that. So not only do a lot of these Mexicans send substantial remittances back to Mexico, they will live communally in the United States, that sort of thing. Then they also, when they go shopping, tend to shop at Mexican shops on the other side of the border. So it's not that much of their money actually stays in the United States in the overall scheme of things. A lot of the places that they rent and the shops they go to are also owned by the Mexicans. So the money is kept very tightly in the Mexican community. They don't spend, like the Indians and others, they don't spend their money, unless they absolutely have to. They don't spend their money outside of the community, so it doesn't benefit the wider community. They're not buying based on convenience, efficiency, quality of service, or things like that. So they're not working in a merit-based economy. They're working in a racial-based economy, which has in its built into it, if you like, built into that racial, inward-looking economic architecture. It doesn't create efficiency, doesn't add to the economy. In fact, it's a drag on the economy. So this is, again, another reason why these subculture communities, racial communities, why they're a bad thing. Now, I guess, in terms of hundreds of billions and a freer, better market-driven economy, which would occur if these Hispanics go. Now, what I've also noticed, though, and I'm sure everyone else has, that many Hispanics that are even born in the United States, and they manage to achieve, say, some sort of public office, like on a local council, or maybe in a state legislature or federal legislature, for that matter, like the American US Congress. They perceive themselves as very much exclusively representing their racial diaspora. They're not representing America. They're not representing American interests. They're not representing law and order. They represent nothing of it. They fully and absolutely represent their as they would see it, their own racial diaspora. The Americans are the bad guys. How can it be that so many tens of millions of people come from South America? They hate America. They hate the United States. The United States is an evil, great Satan, and yet they won't leave. They run around waving Mexican flags, or I don't know, Venezuelan flags, whatever. But you say, well, all right, well, if that's the way you feel, go back to Mexico. No, you can't do that. I don't know how you can square that away. I want to go to America because it's fascist Nazi. I mean, what is it? You want to go to America because it's a fascist Nazi hellhole? Excuse me. Now, there are also other factors at play here that are worth noting. That Mexican, the activist Mexican groups, in the same way that the Indians and others behave, are also, well, we had a very rich, fantastic milk and honey. Everybody, existed on peace and love until damn Whitey came along and fucked it all up. So we're only taking back what Whitey stole from us. the Mexicans, a lot of the South Americans and the Indians in particular think this and believe that they have a right. They are absolutely entitled to go to the place of the great Satan and take back what was taken from them. That's their view. I mean, it's insanity and it's ludicrous. But there's no effort within the American education system or anything else to discourage that point of view. Indeed, I would argue that the FBI and all these institutions that are globalist controlled have been actively fomenting that point of view amongst the Mexican diaspora, so they can become a destabilizing fifth column within the United States. So economically, the Mexican and the South American, other than some, I'm sure there are some industrious, hardworking people, but they're a massive drag on the economy, the American economy. The quicker they're repatriated back to Mexico or elsewhere in South America, the better it'll be for. Will it be good for those South American countries? Well, probably not. It means they're going to have to make adjustments and not be corrupt basket cases, and that's a good thing if that happens. But for the United States, repatriating these people will be a huge good thing, and should happen. Now, on the matter of the riots, I have no doubt these riots are orchestrated and set up, premeditated, planned by the World Economic Forum, George Soros, the United Nations, and working in league with the Democrat Party and some of their subsidiaries. Indeed, even the FBI, I would suggest, CIA perhaps. But nonetheless, the use of these violent street mobs who are attempting to claim moral high ground, we're only doing it because they made us do it. And they're getting the media on side to do it. That needs to be jumped on and clamped down swiftly. Every second that it goes on gives them more a moral propaganda platform, and that needs to be. So the quicker you can stop this, the quicker the propaganda platform will be gone. Now they're going to obviously be hoping and praying for some martyr they can rally around, so that needs to be considered as well. But look, these people are organised, premeditated, funded lawbreakers, and that needs to be high. And their source of income and organisation must be ruthlessly chased after, and with the same ruthlessness and vigour and focus that they used to go after the January 6th grandmothers. No resource was unavailable. No stone was left unturned to make a chase on some poor granny that just happened to be a few hundred metres away from the Capitol building. Use that same methodology to go after these people. Throw them all in prison. Expel them from the country. I mean, do what you got to do, but do it quickly and decisively. Every day that goes on gives them a platform to claim victimhood and to dominate the airwaves and spread propaganda, and that's no help to the United States at all. You've been Tassus today. Your pushback, gentlemen. Thank you for listening.